Let's make sure we've got that. Yeah, it looks like we've got the microphone plugged in. I apologize for that. It's off to a good start. We've got the... There we go. You know, it's sort of fitting. It's sort of perfect that... It's sort of perfect that as we do this post-game show at the end of Pitt's season, with the Panthers getting bounced from the ACC Tournament by Boston College, 66-46. It's kind of perfect that I don't have the microphone plugged in, that we're buffering, that we're having all kinds of streaming issues. I mean, this is exactly the way it should happen. I mean, to be quite honest, I mean, this is perfect. Isn't this a perfect way to end a disaster of a season? And I try to stay away from hyperbole. I think if you've listened to these podcasts, if you've read Panther-Lair.com, if you've had any kind of, if you've followed along with our coverage over the years, this season and beyond, I mean, I think you know that I try to stay away from hyperbole. Hyperbole is not, I try to maintain perspective. I try to ride it down the middle. I try to stay in the gray area and understand that things are rarely in the extremes, that the answer is usually in the middle. You know what I mean? It's a little bit of this, it's a little bit of that. It's a little good, and it's a little bad. And that's how I tend to go. And if you watched post-game shows this year, that's how I tended to go. With the football program, that's how I tended to go. If something goes bad, well, let's look at the positives. If something goes good, let's keep an eye on the negatives. You're always going to find that answer in the middle, and that's where I've tried to stay when it comes to, Pitt coverage, and when it comes to talking about Pitt sports over the years. It's where I've always tried to be. And so I part of that is avoiding hyperbole. And it's hard to avoid hyperbole when it comes to this Pitt basketball season this year. It was an abject disaster in every regard outside of a 3-game stretch. They won 11 games this season, played 32, and won 11. They had a 3-game winning streak. They played pretty well, and the opponent played poorly enough. They had, obviously, 8 other games that they won this year. One against the team that just crushed them by 20 today. They had a handful of games that were close. They had the 1-point loss to Virginia, and a 1-point loss to Minnesota, and a 1-point loss to Notre Dame. And you say, well, they played hard in those games. They worked hard in those games. They tried. But overall, this team was never good enough. Start to finish, never good enough. And we can debate, and I've gone back and forth and talked, how many times did I talk about what they would have been with Nike Sabandi, and what they would have been with Ethan Horton, what they would have been if Jamarius Burton was healthy all year. Well, I'm not really sure it would have made a difference. I'm really not sure it would have made a difference. I mean, Ethan Horton, it looks like, there are stretches where it looks like, yeah, he would have been the answer. He had 2 really good games there. And he's just been... he's provided so very little outside of that. 3 of 8 today. The team's best 3-point shooter, ostensibly the best 3-point shooter, the guy whose job it is to make threes, and he goes 0 of 2 from 3. And it's not the O. The O obviously bothers me. The 0 bothers me. But only attempting 2 3-pointers in this game? What are you even attempting to do here? What's the point? This team today in this game against Boston College, they had 3 good players. Jamarius Burton, Mo Gee, and John Hughley. And I said that going into the game, that those guys were going to be the key, because at this point in the season, after 31 games, I think we knew pretty well that they were the only 3 that you could really rely on for something consistent and productive and positive. And if you had any chance to win, it was going to come from those 3 guys playing really, really well. And today, those 3 guys, I can't say played really, really well, but Burton was 4 of 9 from the floor. Gee scored 12 on 4 of 10 shooting. Hughley scored 15 on 7 of 12. The rest of the roster accounted for 9 points. The entire rest of the roster produced 9 points outside of Gee, Hughley, and Burton. When I said that Pitt was going to have to rely on those 3 guys, I didn't mean the rest of the team should score 9. They're not good enough. They weren't good enough. They haven't been good enough. They haven't been good enough all season, and they weren't good enough today. They had a handful of games this season where they were good enough. A handful. And for the most part, they weren't. Out of 32 games, how many times were they good enough? They were good enough 11 times. And you could maybe throw in a couple of those 1-point losses. And you could also probably debate and say that they weren't good enough in a couple of their wins. Not good enough. Not good enough. And the what ifs and the hypotheticals and the geez, if this could have happened or geez, if that could have happened. Boy, if they still had Xavier Johnson and Lloyd East Toney and Justin Champagny, if they still had Trey McGowan's on this team, if they had Ethiel Horton all season, if they had Nike Sabandi all season, if they had Jamarius Burton all season, well past the point of caring about those what ifs. Well past the point of caring about those hypotheticals. Well past the point of finding any way to excuse what this team has done this season. They were dealt a tough hand. There's no question when you lose 2 of the 3 guys, when you lose 2 guys that you think you're going to count on. Going into the season, the guys that you expect to be 2 out of your top 3 players, if not 2 out of your top 4, certainly 2 starters in Horton and Sabandi. That's tough. That's tough. And you're going to have to account for that. And you're going to have to adjust for that. And maybe that maybe that explains some of their early season struggles. Maybe that explains some of the problems they had at the beginning of this year, when it took a while to adjust to a no rotation. Maybe that almost explains the Citadel game. But it doesn't. But maybe. Let's give the benefit of the doubt there that, boy, it was too short amount of time to adjust the rotation and everything they had planned in the offseason. It was too much to do. It was too hard to adjust to. Okay. There's no reason why in Game 32 they should be playing like they played. They made 18 field goals in this game. 18 field goals. They scored 46 points. And once the game started getting away from them, they were lost. Once they had to play at least a little bit of time without John Hughley, they were lost. They got beat by 20 by a team that scored 66 points. This isn't when Duke went 86 to 56 on them. It wasn't when Miami beat them by 21. It wasn't when Notre Dame beat them by 24. Those are 3 of the top 4 teams in the conference. Those are 3 teams that aren't going to play a game in this ACC tournament for a couple days. This is a team that won 6 conference games all season. This is a team that won 11 games overall all year. This is a game of any of them. This is a team of any of the teams you could face in this ACC tournament. This is a team that you should at least be competitive against and not get run out of the gym by 20 points. You should at least be able to make a couple baskets, even if you don't have John Hughley for a few minutes in the first half. And they got nothing. Nothing. And I don't like going down the road of questioning effort, questioning interest, questioning intensity. But every one of these 4 games, and they've lost 5 in a row, and you could I think you could see some of it in the Georgia Tech game. It ended up being a 6-point loss, but that was a 15 to 20 point blowout wrapped up in a 6-point loss. But each of the other 3 games leading into today, I think you could see there was a moment when the air went out of the team, and it was just a matter of, can we get a running clock here? And I don't mean, it's not attacking character. I don't mean to do that. I try not to do those kinds of things. But you can't tell me that the team that, got beat by Miami by 21, got beat by Duke by 30, got beat by Notre Dame by 24, and got beat by Boston College by 20 was giving 100% effort for 40 minutes. Especially not today. And I said it. I said it on Twitter. I said this team needs to get out to a hot start. They have to start strong because they've collapsed when they've fallen behind by a significant amount in the last 3 games. And 4 games, really. And that's exactly what happened today. They were competitive early. But Hughley gets the second foul. And it falls apart. And they're never able to recover. They had 3 good players in this game today. And those 3, just played okay. And maybe I'm even being too kind with that. What a disappointment. And I mean, I guess it's a disappointment depending on your expectations, right? You can't be disappointed if you didn't have high expectations. And I think most Pitt fans didn't have high expectations for this team. But I think even if your expectations were low, beginning of the season, mid-season, start of the conference play, start of the conference tournament, even if your expectations were low, I have to think that this team managed to find its way even lower than where you expected them to be. There was no pride in this performance today. You know, there was no, there was, you just wonder, what are you playing for? What are you doing out there? Does anyone care? And again, I shouldn't say that. I mean, these guys work hard. They work hard day in, day out. They try to get better at their game. They go out and they try to play. And I think, we've seen them have some good efforts at the beginning of games and some not so good efforts at the beginning of games. But there were points in a lot of games this season, 21 of them, maybe more, where you said, boy, they just don't seem invested in it. And I think that falls on a lot of people. It falls on the players, it falls on the coaches, it falls on the whole program. And this is what Pitt basketball is. Right now in 2021-22, it's a team that gets beat by 20, by a team that won 11 games this year. By a team that won 6 conference games. And it's a pretty rough place to be. It's a pretty rough place to be. All right, I don't know. We'll see how much. I don't know how long we're going to go on this post-game show. It is a Panther-Lair Show, a special post-game edition at the end of Pitt's season with the bounce from the ACC tournament. And I was like, I'm going to do a post-game show today no matter what. I thought, if they win, then we'll do another one tomorrow. You know what I mean? We'll go back to back. And if they lose, then it'll just serve as sort of a, instant reaction post-mortem on the game and on the season and whatnot. But it is a Panther-Lair Show. Of course, Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. You should go there because everything we're talking about here, it's being talked about a whole lot on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. We'll have plenty of coverage of the game, of course. And I got to shout out, I'm going to have a bigger shirt on here, but home field, I was sporting the retro rock today. Still trying to keep it real for homefieldapparel.com. Go check them out. They have look. You're disappointed about Pitt basketball, no question. You should, but you still like sweet Pitt shirts, right? And that's what the vintage rock is. It's super high quality shirt, great fabric, great material, great logo. It's just, it's as good as you're gonna find. So go homefieldapparel.com and drown your sorrows with retail therapy, right? Go buy a sweet Pitt shirt. All right, I want to jump into the chat, and we'll just chat here for a while and talk about this game and this season. And a lot of chat messages already in there. If you want to make sure your comment gets read, your question gets answered, you can always be a super chatter. Click that $sign at the end of the chat. Throw a couple bucks to the podcast. We appreciate you being, we appreciate your support. Like Michael B., who's a regular super chatter, and we big time appreciate you. Says, Chris, I'm not going to lie, I'm so depressed about the state of this program. Pitt looked again today that they had given up once Boston College went on a run. Do you see a lot of transfers coming? Because I definitely do. Femi equals embarrassing. Femi Odikali has struggled. I mean, he's been in a pretty bad way for a while. I do think, and this is not to excuse anything necessarily that we saw today or at any point this season, I think he's been dealing with an injury. I think he's been slowed by that. We know for a fact that he's had an injury a couple different times. This season, we've seen him, in a boot. We've seen him hobbling around after games. We've seen him leave games. And so that has been an issue. But, I mean, on the whole, he has just not been much of a factor. And when he's been a factor, he's been a negative factor. Today, 0 of 4 from the floor, 0 of 1 from 3, 2 rebounds, 1 assist, 3 turnovers, and 4 personal fouls, including the flagrant and technical that somehow Boston College didn't get anything called on. But, that's one of those things in a game that you're just, by the end of the game, you like, who cares? At the time when they were reviewing that to see if Odikale should get called for a flagrant or technical, he got the tech. right off the bat, and then reviewing it, I guess, to see if he should get a flagrant, and then maybe reviewing it to see if Boston College should be called for anything. At that time, everyone was up in arms. The same thing with the charge call on Jamarius Burton, or that bad foul call, which I guess was a continuation, even though the guy had the ball in his armpit. But nevertheless, we argued about those things, and everybody got worked up during the game. But now in the aftermath, after a 20-point loss, it seems a little less relevant, a little less significant, and a little less important now. But I mean, as far as the state of things, Michael B. I tend to agree. When Boston College started taking some momentum, they took the momentum, and Pitt seemed incapable of taking it back, which was all too often the case this season. John Hughley's your guy. Mogi has a chance to be your guy. Jamarius Burton has a chance to be your guy, and those guys were doing what they could. But there were too many empty possessions, too many one-and-done possessions, too many turnovers, it felt like. How many did they end up with? Pitt finished with 14 turnovers, which is way too many for a team that shoots like Pitt. You can't afford to waste any possession with a turnover. On the occasion that they got an offensive rebound, which they had 6, they only managed 3 points, 3 second chance points. So even when they got an offensive rebound, they didn't produce anything out of it. They were unable to stop Boston College's momentum, and you could just feel the wind go out of the sails. Again. This is something we've seen time and time again, and here it is. And so it's almost fitting that the season ends on this kind of note, because it sure looks like at least the last 3 games, even though those last 3 games were against good teams, and Boston College is not all that great. JL is a super chatter. We appreciate it. Says, I've read your reporting on the contract, but have you heard anything at all suggesting that Pitt may fire Jeff Capel? Should we blame Heather Lyke? So, the situation, as far as I see it, as far as I understand it, and as far as it's been explained to me, is still what it was. It's what it was at the beginning of March. It's what it was at the middle of February, what it was at the beginning of February, middle of January. That this contract carries a significant buyout. Probably in the $17 million range that I think Seth Davis reported on The Athletic. And that is a lot of money for a school like Pitt to pay a guy to go away. And I've said this over and over again, and maybe I'll end up being wrong. I learned a long time ago that you never guarantee anything. I learned a long time ago that you never say anything is definite or 100%. I learned a long time ago that expectations of a certain situation or outcome can change. I learned that a long time ago. And so I'm not sitting here guaranteeing anything. But I have a hard time seeing Pitt on all levels, university administration and athletic department, coming up with and committing to spend that money to fire Jeff Capel. The results through 4 seasons are the kind of results that would usually get a coach fired. I think you follow college sports, and if you have the success or the lack thereof that Jeff Capel has had in the first 4 years, usually leads to a coaching change. But there are some things that are just cost prohibitive. And it feels like this buyout is in that category. And you could say that, well, they're not committed to winning, or, well, they're not committed to athletics, or basketball is too important. They need to commit to basketball, even if it means shutting, cutting off funds from other sports and things like that. And you could even say it's only $17 million. They just need to step up and pay it. It's easy when it's someone else's money. It's not your money to spend. And I think if you were in that situation, you'd find it to be a much more difficult call. If there was no buyout whatsoever, maybe it'd be easy then. Maybe the decision would be made to change. Because obviously what's going on to this point has not been working for a variety of circumstances, but it has not been working. But the buyout isn't zero. The buyout is what it is. And it's a lot. And I think it's too much for Pitt to pay. And I've said before, I think it's more than Pitt should pay. And I know you might not like that, but I look at the situation and I say, it's just not responsible for Pitt to put up that kind of cash, plus the money it would take to hire a new coach, the best coach you can find on the market. I just don't think it's responsible to pay that kind of money. As bad as the last 4 years have been, as bad as this year has been, I think you have to give it another year and keep that money. And I know fans don't want to hear that. I know fans want to believe that college athletics has, unlimited funds and will, pay to make anything go away. But I don't think that's the reality for a vast majority of college athletics programs across the country. And nor should it be. I mean, at some point, there has to be some rational thought applied, right? At some point, there has to be some responsibility applied and some responsible spending. I had these, pipe dreams in 2020 when, games were getting canceled or they weren't going to have fans and there were going to be significant revenue losses. I thought, okay, this might be the reset button on college athletics, pulling itself back in and saying, hold on, we don't need to spend quite as much as we do. We can be a little bit more reasonable about this. We can monitor our spending a little bit more. I had these pipe dreams that was going to happen. That hasn't been the case. You know what I mean? You see the deal that, Mel Tucker, the Michigan State coach, how much is he getting? Like $90 million or something like that? So no, we're out of whack again. We're crazy with this stuff again. When athletic departments across the country are operating in the red, where they rely on the TV money more than anything they actually do themselves to generate revenue. But for a lot of these schools, most of these schools, almost all of these schools, there is a limit. There is a ceiling. And I remember back in December of 2016 with Matt Canada, right? He gets hired away to LSU. It's a money move. LSU offered more than Pitt would offer. And even though Pitt was willing to offer $1 million a year to Matt Canada to be the offensive coordinator, and he got $1.2 million or whatever it was at LSU, Pitt fans, they're not committed to winning. They're not going to put support behind this. If they're not going to pay to keep their assistants, what are we even doing here? I said, listen, they committed a heck of a lot of cash to trying to keep Matt Canada and showed a lot of commitment in trying to keep him on the staff. But at some point, there's a ceiling. Okay, the ceiling can be really high, but eventually you're going to hit a ceiling. And at that point, you have to stop. At that point, you can't spend beyond that. There are only a handful of schools in this country that can be ridiculous in their spending, and most of them are in the SEC. Somebody asked, I was having a conversation with someone the other day about, why is the ACC fallen? Why is the ACC not as good a basketball conference as it was a couple years ago, as it historically has been? And I think there's a lot of different things go into it. Mostly, I think it's cyclical, and I think the ACC can bound back up into its rightful position as a basketball conference. But one big problem for everyone in college basketball is that a bunch of SEC schools have decided they actually care about hoops. Because they've got the piles of cash, the Scrooge McDuck money. And if they all decide that they actually care about hoops, they're going to dump a lot of money into basketball. And the SEC is going to get really strong in hoops. And I don't know if there's anybody else in the country who can keep up with them. Because nobody else in the country has been able to keep up with them in football. And if they devote that kind of dedication and that level of resources and commitment and support to basketball, it's going to be really hard to keep up with them there. But that's the SEC. And for everybody else in the country, for most everybody else in the country, with only a handful of exceptions, there's a ceiling. And at some point you hit that ceiling. And you can't really push past that ceiling because at the end of the day, you're not just a sports factory. You're a university. You've got a whole lot going on beyond just sports. Even though sports is the front door, right? Sports is the front porch of of the university, and all these things that chancellors like to say. I mean, if you talk to Patrick Gallagher, Pitt's chancellor, athletics are very, very important to him, and he's put a lot of support behind athletics. There's no question about it. But he's got a lot of other things that he's dealing with too. Athletics are not the only thing that happens at Pitt. Just like athletics are not the only thing that happen at Boston College, at Georgia Tech, at Minnesota. And so at some point you have to have a ceiling. At some point you have to have some responsibility. At some point you have to be an adult about it and say we can't just spend ourselves into oblivion to do this facility thing and to fire this coach and to do this and do that. You can spend a lot of money, you can have a lot of commitment, you can have a lot of support, you can put a lot of resources behind it, and you can still be reasonable about it. You can still be rational about it, and you can still not put yourself deeply in the red to the point where you're actually running into trouble. And there are schools that have done that have spent themselves almost into oblivion. And then they run into real issues on the university scale, not just the athletic department. It's very important for the university to support athletics as much as possible. And I think this university, and I think this chancellor, and I think this administration does support athletics a whole lot, as much as possible. But you cannot allow athletics to put your university under. You can't. There's only a certain amount of debt you can be willing to take on and incur for athletics. Okay? And that doesn't mean that you don't care about athletics. That doesn't mean you're not committed to winning. It just means that you've got to be responsible. That was a long tangent and tirade. But it's stuff I've been thinking about a lot. Let's roll through more comments and questions. Kevin Ploucha says, "Hey there, Chris. Thanks for all your coverage and insight this season." Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate you always tuning in. One of our guys, Roman. Haven't seen Roman in a long time. Maybe we need to be online at 4:00 in the afternoon on a Tuesday to get Roman involved. But he says, "Chris, a lot of people joke that Scott Barnes killed Pitt basketball. It may end up being Heather Lyke. How crazy is that?" I mean, you know, I'm not willing to say that Pitt basketball is killed. I'm not willing to say that Pitt basketball is dead, and I'm not willing to say that any one person put it in its current state. Things were trending down at the end of the Jamie Dixon era. Even if they were still enjoying the success, the likes of which we would all be celebrating around here right now, certainly would like to have over the current results. But it was trending down at the end of the Jamie Dixon era. Obviously, the hire of Kevin Stallings was a disaster. There's no question about that. A change was needed to be made, and a change was made. And the change was made to a coach that I think everyone liked seeing Pitt get. You know what I mean? That was roundly praised. It has not worked for these 4 years for a variety of reasons. But ultimately, the head coach is accountable for that. Ultimately, the head coach, no matter what the circumstances, no matter what the situation, no matter what the reasons for why it has gone the way it has gone, it all falls on the head coach. And I think Jeff Capel knows that as well as anyone. And so I think he has to be taking a very long look, very hard look at why things have gone the way they've gone. And I'm not sure what answers he's going to find. I don't think he's going to share most of them publicly. But he's got to take this offseason and realize what's riding on this offseason. Because the last 4 years are on him. No matter what he inherited, no matter what he has done since then, no matter, personnel issues or locker room drama or this or that, whatever kind of strife he has incurred, whether it's his fault or not, it's on him. And he has to realize that. And the time is going to come when it's going to put him in a position to lose his job. If it keeps up like this. And he has to realize that and understand that this offseason. That next year very well could be a make or break year for Jeff Capel. And so he has to understand that. And I think he's a smart guy. I think he does understand it. I think he will understand it. And he's got to go into this offseason and make the moves and changes and decisions necessary to try to improve. Justin E says, "Is he getting fired? If not, then it won't be getting better until he is." I don't, like I said, I don't, I still don't think he's getting fired. I think it's cost prohibitive for Pitt. Vince Pilata says, "Why do you think Burton has regressed? Seems like players regress in this program for years. Pitt's defense has been pathetic since the North Carolina game." Yeah, the defense has been a big problem. Jamarius Burton, I actually wanted to look up his stats before we talked about this. Where is he? I'm bringing up his last few games. So Burton, I think to some extent he's gotten run down a little bit He was shut out in the game at Virginia Tech. Scored 13 at Florida State. Scored 17 against NC State. Again, that was a win. He shot 5 of 11 in that game. The next game, the Carolina game, he shot 4 of 11. Didn't do much there and had 4 assists. But then Georgia Tech, he only scores 4 points, 1 of 11 shooting. Miami, he scores 4 of 11 shooting. He scores 12 points. 6 of 9 against Duke. 2 of 9 at Notre Dame today. What was he, 4 of 9? I think he's gotten worn down. I think he's tried to take a lot on himself. I think he's tried to, I don't want to say like play hero ball, but I think at times he's felt like he's had to. At times he's felt like there's no good option on the perimeter. There's no good option in the backcourt other than him. And so if he's going, he's the only one that can do something. And he's not entirely wrong in that, and so I think it's at a certain point maybe it just wore him down. He was playing a lot of minutes. I think there are probably a lot of things that go into it, and it'd be interesting to see what Jeff Capel says at the end of the season or in the offseason. It'd be interesting to see what Jamarius Burton says, and then in the offseason and when next year begins, because I expect him to be back. Kevin Plotcher says it's tough to see Capel coming back, but good Lord, $15 million buyout is a lot. Yeah, and I think it's more like 17, Kevin. It is a lot. Let's see here. Josh Newark says, only saw the last 8 minutes of the game. Should I rewatch the beginning or just avoid the dumpster fire? Okay, just kidding. Why would I waste my time? Seems like these guys checked out a month ago. I think you could watch the beginning of the game. You could see kind of what they were doing that was working. I mean, they fell behind early. But you could see what they were doing that was working when they were having success prior to John Hughley getting his second foul. You can see what an aggressive Hughley looks like. You can see what an assertive Hughley looks like. And you can maybe get a sense of what, next season could be. If they have John Hughley back, they'll have Jamarius Burton back. You can get a sense of what that sort of core and foundation would look like with Hughley and Burton out there. They're obviously going to have to fill in pieces around those guys. And that's going to be in the transfer portal primarily. Because I'm not really sure what they could get out of recruiting right now in the class of 2022, the high school kids. I'm not sure they're going to get anybody who could come in and help them right now, or help them next season. And so you're talking about transfer portal additions. It's going to be a power forward. It's guards. I think plural. I think you need multiple transfer guards. I don't know if that's possible, but I don't know how you look at this backcourt and feel like, yeah, this is a great situation coming back, even if everybody returns. How do you feel great about it given how they've played down the stretch outside of Burton? So, the first 10 minutes of the game, 15 minutes of the game can give you a sense of, potential for next year, I guess, what the core could be. Hogmuncher says, don't know what's worse, all the embarrassing losses we had to watch this year or the general apathy surrounding the basketball program now. There's not even much hope for the team next year. That's a tough thing, truthfully. I mean, it was one thing when it was anger, but it almost feels like the anger has passed and there's apathy with the basketball program. And that's a tough place to be, to have apathy as the dominant sort of vibe or emotion of the fan base. Apathy's a bad thing. He follows up and says, what transfer fixes this? Transfer, I mean, you need a power forward, to start. You do need a guard. I would agree with that. I think you need a guard. A ball handler. Everybody always talk about a point guard. I think you do need a ball handler. I'll come around on that, even though I'm not entirely sure that this offense uses a traditional point guard. I mean, I think you need somebody else who can bring the ball up. You need a shooter. You need a power forward. You need help at all spots. You really do. And then you have to hope that you need Hughley to come back. You need Burton, who I think is going to be here. Horton will be here. Sabandi will be here. And then you need to hope that a guy like Nate Santos takes a big step forward. And I'm not sure we've seen a ton of development outside of Justin Champagnie from anybody over the last 4 years. So you're going to be counting on development of Nate Santos. You're going to be counting on John Hughley coming back. You're going to be counting on getting a power forward and at least one guard out of the transfer portal who can come in and play at a significant level. It's a lot to ask for. Super chatter here. RJ Seaman 38 is a super chatter. Not Not sure what your comments are there, but we'll keep an eye out, and we'll watch for it to see what you have to say. Let's see here as we scroll through. JPlan72 says, I miss going to New York City, getting hyped for a long March run in the dance. Yeah, it was. So, I mean, on one hand, like, you know, I said this on Twitter. It's fun having weekday afternoon basketball. Like, you know, the game, obviously, you know, the Pitt game ended, but the TV's still on over there in the Panther-Lair studios watching Clemson and NC State. It's fun to watch afternoon weekday basketball. I'm a big fan of that. You know, even though we knew that this game potentially could be the end of the season for Pitt, you know, it was still fun to have you know, that kind of, you know, watch a game in the middle of the afternoon. But it was a little bit of a bummer to sort of, you know, it's one thing if you get bounced in the first game of your conference tournament, but you know you're going to make it to the NCAA tournament either way. You know, that there's a little bit of an extra security there, and Pitt certainly didn't have that. And so knowing that whatever game this week was going to be their last game of the season, and you know, that's it for Pitt basketball, it's over. Yeah, it's kind of a it's disappointing for sure. Sam Smallwood says, I'll never forget the optimism I had after Capel's opening press conference. Nothing could have been worse than Stallings' introduction. I should have known that it was too good to be true. Hey, he still won 6 conference games. Kevin Stallings won 0. Right? So, I guess there's that. Scrolling through here. Brock Madonic says, looking forward to Pitt baseball, and Roman follows up, baseball should be solid again this year. They're a very fun team to watch. Yeah, baseball is going to be interesting. We'll definitely be keeping an eye on that as time goes on. Booty Bandit says, if they don't fire Jeff Capel, just tear down the Peterson Events Center and build the football stadium because you obviously have given up. I don't care how big the buyout is. I mean, it's easy not to care how big the buyout is when it's not your money. You know, and when you don't have 300 and some student athletes to think about, when you don't have an athletic department to support, when you don't have an entire university to run. I think when you have all those things on your plate, basketball is very, very important. It's one of the most important programs in the athletic department. It's one of the 2 most important programs in the athletic department, but it's not the most important thing in the university. It's very high on the list, but it's not important enough. I don't think it's important enough. I don't think anything in athletics is important enough to generate that kind of money spent on that particular venture. Paying a guy not to coach. PGH says, how I feel about the basketball team at this point is about the same as how I feel about the Pirates. Yeah, but prospects, man. You can still look at the Baseball America Top 100 Prospects list when it comes to the Pirates. Upstate Bill says, victory at North Carolina was the highlight of the season. Everything fell apart after that. Yeah, can't deny that. I can't disagree with you, Bill. It was all downhill from there. They lost 5 games in a row, including one of the worst teams in the conference. Dave Yark says, Heather Lyke has done well overall. However, she needs to admit her mistake and negotiate that buyout over several years now, which Capel should agree to because he has to admit he's failed. So, I've maintained all along that I don't think there'd be any reason Jeff Capel would negotiate his buyout to a lower amount. It'd be interesting to see if they could convince him to take a buyout spread out over a couple of years. It'd be interesting to see if the university would be interested or agreeable to paying a buyout in that kind of fashion. People have said a bunch of times on the message board, well, they just got to get that number negotiated down. And to which I reply, why would Capel do that? You know, what leverage does Pitt have to compel Jeff Capel to negotiate a buyout down? I don't get it. I don't see what I can't see the motivation on that one. Josh Newark says bad shooting is bad shooting, but what really bothered me was the lazy passes on the perimeter that resulted in turnovers and Hughley constantly in foul trouble because of stupid lazy fouls. I mean, John Hughley's a big physical center. I think you want physicality to be part of his game. I think you want him to draw a couple or be called for a couple physical fouls every game because you want him to be physical. You want his presence to be felt, and sometimes that's going to turn into a foul call. You don't want him to take too many offensive fouls. That's a tough one. He had one early. I think it was his second foul. He threw his elbow into a guy, and I don't think you're really going to intimidate them all that much by doing that. So that one's an unnecessary foul. It's kind of, sort of what you said, Josh, is something I've said since the beginning of the season. I said in the offseason, I think I said it during the year last year, that look, offense is going to come and go. Shooting is going to come and go. You might be a good shooting team. You might be a bad shooting team. Either way, you're going to have good shooting nights and you're going to have bad shooting nights. Some of those things are just going to happen. Some nights the ball is going to go through the hoop and some nights it's not. What you can control and what you have a lot more control over is your effort on defense and your effort on rebounding and how you take care of the basketball, how you protect the basketball. And Pitt, far too often this season, came up way short in those regards. Way short. And that's, what did Boston College shoot in this game? They shot 53% in this game. 7 of 15 from 3. 7 of 15, 47% for a team that is not good at shooting threes. They were 4 of 7 in the second half from 3. 57%. And they shot 53.5% from the floor. That's not good enough. 17 assists on 23 baskets for Boston College. They passed well, they moved the ball, and they made their shots. And Pitt didn't defend well enough. And so I agree wholeheartedly about that. There's no excuse for that. There's absolutely no excuse for that. Al's AJM Trains says, hopefully we improve next season. Good call, Al. I agree with you. We'll see. Sam Smallwood says, if Capel is retained, would a winning record next season, even if it's only a game or two over 500, change anything, or is his fate already sealed? Not that I think we could accomplish even that. I don't know. I can't deal in hypotheticals. I think if Heather Lyke were asked a question like that, I think her answer should be, I'm not going to deal in hypotheticals or what ifs. We approach each situation. We look at each situation. We evaluate each situation. And a lot will depend on the circumstances. So I have no idea I have no idea how that hypothetical will play out. Royce Beacom says, consider where the lack of offense is coming from. Like, Horton didn't even try a shot for the first 18 minutes. Then he shot one attempt for the remainder of the first half. So here's the thing. So Ethiel Horton, you're right, goes 3 of 8 from the floor, 0 of 2 from 3. And this is what I don't get. And maybe somebody smarter than me, I don't know if our guy Steve Gertz is watching the podcast. I'm sure he'll do some film breakdowns on this kind of thing. But if you have Ethiel Horton, the best shooter on your team, who gets the most minutes, Nate Santos is a pretty good shooter, but let's say Ethiel Horton, best shooter on the team, and he only has 2 3-point attempts in a game where you lose by 20. Run a play to get him an open shot. And maybe they are. Maybe they're running plays all over the place to get him open shots, and either guys aren't passing to him, or he's not running it right, or it's just not being executed, or it's being defended perfectly. I don't know. But when he only ends up with 2 attempts from beyond the arc, it tells me you didn't do enough to get him opportunities from beyond the arc. Is the game plan to expect Ethiel Horton to create his own shot from 3 8 times a game, 7 times a game, 5 times a game? Run a play for him. And this comes back to a question I've had all season. I just don't know what they're trying to do. I don't know what the goal is on offense. Ostensibly it's to score points, but I don't really know how they're attempting to go about that. But I'm not smart when it comes to basketball, so I can't really say too much there. But I don't know. I don't know what they're trying to do. Joshua Brown says, we may have trended down, but it's hard not to trend down when you were 1 seed 2 times in 3 years. We should have been higher than a 9 Dixon's last year, and we should have kept him. I think that I think you look at the results over those last couple years of the Dixon era. I have it here. So, his last season, they go 9-9 in the ACC. They win 21 games, and they're a 10 seed. in the NCAA tournament, and that was the 47-43 game against Wisconsin, right? That's not great. The year before, they go 8-10 in the ACC, and they go to the NIT and barely show up against George Washington. The year before that, they're a 9 seed, and they lose to, they beat Colorado, and then they lose to Florida. So they actually won a game in the NCAA tournament, the last time they've done that. The year before that, they were an 8 seed when they lost to Wichita State. The year before that, they went to the CBI. So you're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 seasons with 1 win in the NCAA tournament. 5 seasons with only 3 appearances in the NCAA tournament. That's not necessarily headed in the right direction. It's not. So, but, I mean, that's long past the point of mattering, honestly. Royce Beacom says, Chris, I think you're pointing out that when you get a coach that has some success, the administration has to do everything to further assimilate a coach to reach the peak. Not Barnes versus Dixon. You know what? I'll tell you this. I'll say this. Scott Barnes' greatest failure at Pitt was not hiring Kevin Stallings. It was pushing Jamie Dixon out and making it easy for him to go and encouraging him to go and not supporting him and trying to get him to stay and saying, this is our guy. He's going to be our guy. We believe you're going to win a lot of games here, and we want you to coach here for the rest of your life. Steve Peterson wanted Jamie Dixon to coach here for the rest of his life. He wanted to name the court after him. I asked him that once. I said, do you ultimately want to name the court after Jamie Dixon? Yeah, we would love that. What's his name? Who is it? Eddie Sutton or somebody has his name on the court at Oklahoma State or something like that. I remember seeing that and saying, Steve, would you like to have that be the case with Jamie? Is that what you see? And he said, yes, that's what I want Jamie to be eventually. Scott Barnes did not want that. Scott Barnes did not want Jamie Dixon to be the coach, and he wanted him to go. And he got what he wanted. And that was Scott Barnes' greatest sin as Pitt Athletic Director. Worse than hiring Kevin Stallings. I'll maintain that. Coaster King says Jeff Capel has to at the very least change up some of his staff. Surely, it'll be interesting to see. It'll be interesting to see. It's been a rough stretch here, and to not have any changes over the course of 4 years. You got to wonder if that trend shifts. Let's see here. Pete K says, I think we need more patience with Capel. The landscape in NCAA basketball has had a dramatic shift with free agency, plus can't afford it, but keeping hope up. I don't know about patience. I can't fault fans who have lost their patience with Jeff Capel. I can't fault fans for that. It's been a rough 4 years. But you talk about free agency, and I mean, that's interesting because there is an opportunity to turn things around quickly. If you can get the right guys, if you can find the right guys and bring them in and put them in the best position to win, kind of like Wake Forest did. Wake Forest didn't play today. Wake Forest plays tomorrow. They had a bye into the second round because of transfers. It can be done. But you have to find the right guys. You have to put them in the right position. RJC Man 38 says, this is all bunk. There is nothing that can fix this crap show. Like is on the clock, and regardless of Capel, Pitt should never had been in this position. Well, I mean, it was going to take a significant amount to get Jeff Capel. It was going to take a significant amount to get anybody who would come in and take over the situation that Kevin Stallings left at Pitt. I know we don't really want to talk about what Pitt was when Kevin Stallings left anymore because we don't want to make excuses in that regard. But to bring in a coach to take over that situation and inherit that situation, it was going to take, you were going to have to step up. You were going to have to pay him and have a buyout that made it very difficult to fire him early in the contract. And that seems like that's what happened. Let's see here. Let's scroll down here. Trevor, apologize on your last name, Trevor. Trevor Crucial says, what happened to Jeffers this year? Was hoping for some progression, but he always looked not confident with himself out on the court. It's tough. It's really tough with William Jeffress, because I expect him to take a big step forward this year too. I know he's still young. I thought he would be much better this year, and he never got better. He never improved, and he had a lot of opportunities, and he played a lot of minutes, and those minutes went down and waned to where he really wasn't a factor at all. He came out of the starting lineup, he was working off the bench, and he really wasn't getting that much playing time. And he wasn't making that big of an impact. And it's a shame. I think there's potential still in there. But I don't know what his future is going to hold. He's halfway through his college career now. He's been here for 2 years. And I don't know what it's going to bring. I really don't, because I expected a big I expected a step forward from him. I really would. Michael B, double super chatter today. We appreciate it. Says, Capel just said we need to get better players. It's not anything personal. We have to continue to add better players and recruit better players. So, I mean, there's nothing, end quote. Michael B's quoting from Jeff Capel there. I mean, I don't think anybody would disagree with that, right? Like, raise your hand if you think Pitt had good enough players this year. I can't see you, but I'm assuming your hand is not raised. Yeah, of course they need better players. Now, I know that the sort of implication there is that Capel is responsible for getting those players. And he absolutely is. He's got to get better players. And the reason that this hasn't succeeded through 4 years is that he hasn't been able to get good enough players. And he hasn't been able to hold on to good enough players. That's why they haven't been good enough. That's why they lose a game like this. That's why Notre Dame beats them by 21 and Duke beats them by 30 and Miami beats them by 21. That's why they lose to Georgia Tech and they lose to Boston College. And they lose to Boston College twice. That's why they lose to Virginia Tech back-to-back. That's why they get blown out by Clemson. They didn't have good enough players. And that is Jeff Capel's responsibility. That ultimately falls on Jeff Capel. He's responsible for building the roster. And, it's on him. It's on him. Byron Flex says, no recruits, no transfers. Capel $15 million buyout if fired now. Payout $5 million after next year. AD and Pitt News. Ad in Pitt News for players. What else? No recruits, Byron. You're right about that. No transfers. They're not really going to get a transfer yet. I mean, the season is just starting to end for a lot of teams. You're seeing a lot of guys starting to go into the transfer portal, so you're not going to have any transfers yet. You'll get them. They'll get them. They'll have to get them. The buyout is, I think it's more like $17 million after this year, like $17 million right now. I don't think it's $5 million after next year. I think it's more than 5. Probably, I don't know, 7 or maybe even closer to 10. So it goes down, but not all the way to 5. I mean, but we've talked about it. We've gone over and over and over and over and over and over again about this. Nick says, sad thing is half the people in here complaining about Capel were also the ones calling for Dixon to leave. We've selectively forgotten all the dislike for Jamie Dixon. I don't think there's any question about that, but that's how it always goes. And, it's certainly, we look back at the success that he had and what he achieved with the program, even in the latter years, and say, boy, it would certainly take that this year. You know what I mean? 21 wins in his last year, 19 before that, 26, 24, 22. Even the year they went to the CBI, they were 22-17. I mean, it's been a long time since a 20-win season. And we would certainly take that, I think. Everyone can agree about that. But at the time, winning the CBI, even though it was a 20-win season, didn't feel so hot. Right? Getting bounced by Wichita State didn't make that 24-win season feel any better. The Wisconsin game certainly didn't make a 21-win season feel any better. So, let's see. Jay Frank says, Pitt just never built an identity this year other than it being the John Hughley show. Look how terrible the offense became once he had to sit with 2 fouls. Looked like the local YMCA. Well, I mean, part of that is he was their best player. I agree with you, Jay. You're right, but he was also their best player. So you take a team's best player off the court, and they are going to look like the local YMCA if they don't have very many good players, which Pitt didn't. And so, I mean, I think Jamarius Burton had a good season overall. Mo Gee had a good season overall. John Hughley had a good season overall. But, I mean, that's it. I don't think you would go beyond those three when you talk about players who had a good season for Pitt this year. And so if you took one of those three out, especially the guy who is the best in Hughley, well, guess what the result is? It's not very good. All right. I think we'll do our regular weekly show tomorrow night, Wednesday night at 8:30, because we got to stick to a regular schedule. We'll talk some spring football. We'll have some more, after 24-hour rest, cooling down period. We'll talk a little more Pitt basketball. In the meantime, stay tuned to Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Go to Homefield, see the Vintage Rock, HomeFieldApparel.com. It's a place you want to go and hang out there to get the sweetest Pitt gear that you're going to find. You're disappointed about Pitt basketball. I understand it, but you can still look good while you're mad, right? HomeFieldApparel.com. All right, thanks everybody for tuning in on this post-game show. It was a lot of fun. I'm glad we had a chat, even if the results of the game were not what you wish it would be. So thanks everybody in the live stream, all the super chatters, big time shout out to you guys for the support. And, like I say, we'll be back Wednesday night. We'll come have our regular weekly show on Wednesday night at 8:30. So thanks again. We will talk to you tomorrow night. Have a good night.